Building the PBX Part 2 Trunks. In this section, we'll cover building trunks for the Asterisk PBX system. Trunks are essential components that enable connectivity between the PBX and external telephony networks or service providers. They facilitate the transfer of voice traffic in and out of the PBX environment. Understanding the configuration and management of trunks is crucial for establishing reliable and cost-effective communication channels with your telephony infrastructure. SIP trunks are becoming mainstream on telcos. They offer digital, high-volume connectivity, only limited by bandwidth availability. One of the key advantages of SIP trunks is that they do not require any investment in legacy hardware infrastructure. This leads to significant savings in rack space, electricity consumption, and so on. SIP trunks provides a cost-effective and scalable solution for modern telecommunication needs. So it's important here to understand that uh, the old digital trunks are disappearing. Most of the connections in these days will be done using SIP trunks. To set up a SIP trunk with your provider, you need their IP address and authentication credentials like username and password. Some providers also allow IP authentication. The authentication happens per transaction, like registration or individual calls. Additionally, you need to configure the return address or extension where incoming calls should ring when receiving over this SIP trunk from the provider side. So usually the connection is you provide the IP address, name, password, sometimes IP authentication, and you need to provide the extension that will ring when receiving a connection from the SIP trunk. Asterisk registration. This is in a slide that it's not very easy to understand, but let's see. We now have PJ-SIP, and PJ-SIP uh, is registering to an external server. Here I'm using my own server, sip.flagon.com, as the destination. So uh, sip.flagon.com is doing the role of an ITSP, the service provider. So what I'm doing in the asterisk now is registering to this trunk provider. So here we have created this registration SIP, type equals registration, transport equals transport UDP. So we are using UDP here, and this is defined elsewhere in the file. Authentication, outbound authentication is on the trunk SIP authentication here below. The server URI, the Uniform Resource Identifier, sip.flagon. Pay attention here that this is 5600, not the standard 5060. I use this port just to avoid the spurious traffic on the port 5060 that happens on the internet. Client URI is 1010 at sip.flagon.com. This is the end user there, the extension 1010, right? Retry interval 60. Right. This is the trunk SIP authentication. I'm sending username 1010 and the password super secret. So this is just the registration. I'm just registering to the server, informing that 1010 now is registered on the specific IP address of your server. So that's the whole idea of the asterisk registration. So we need to pass the UDP port, the IP or domain, the name, the password, all the credentials you have. But this is not enough. This is just for registration. Registration is not a login to the other platform. Registration on SIP, everything is transactional. So you don't log in on the platform. The process of registration, let's say, the only requirement for the registration is to receive calls. Is when you register, you are just registering your current IP address on the next platform. Now we are going to the SIP trunk definition. So here we are going to define how you're going to send calls to the other platform, right? So this is a little different than registration. You have sent a register. Now the platform knows your own IP address. Now we need to send calls. So we create this trunk SIP like an endpoint. Here we do some codec control. So I'm disallowing all codecs and I'm allowing only ULAW because this provider only accepts ULAW. Transport UDP. Here we just link the address of record that it's here, and also the authentication that's defined elsewhere. The from user, this is very important. We are using 1010, In many cases, you need to define the from domain. Many providers require you to use the from domain as the same domain as the provider's name. Outbound authentication. What's the outbound authentication here? So we are using trunk SIP authentication. Direct media equals no. This is just to connect directly to media. Context from SIP trunk. This context is very important. Whenever you receive a call on the SIP trunk, they will be processed on the from SIP trunk in this context in the dial plan. And contact user is equally important. This is the extension where you are going to receive the calls. So any call arriving on this SIP trunk will arrive on the extension 9999. Trunk SIP, the address of record. So the address of record here is actually the final destination of the call. SIP column sip.flaggonk.com 5600. Pay a lot of attention on this because this is a port that it's not standard. The standard port is 5060. We use 5600 to avoid the spurious traffic on the internet. And then the trunk identifier. What's the requirement for this trunk identifier? This is important. So I'm saying any request arriving from this address, sip.flaggonk.com, should match the endpoint trunk SIP. I'm just saying, okay, anything arriving from this IP address, please set to this specific endpoint. This is new, but it's very, let's say, flexible and very powerful in a way that you redirect your traffic on Asterisk. To check registration details and configure endpoints in Asterisk, you can use pjsip show command from the Asterisk CLI. This will display various objects and information related to the pjsip channel driver, including registrations, endpoint definitions, transports, and more. Carefully review the registration and endpoint sections to verify if your setup is correct and operational. The DTMF dual-tone multi-frequency signaling mode in Asterisk PBX can be configured using different options in the endpoint. The auto mode automatically detects and handles DTMF tones sent via either RFC 4733 or SIP info methods. The RFC 4733 mode, which is the same as the RFC 2833, handles DTMF tones encapsulated in RTP packets. According to the RFC 4733. The info mode processes DTMF tones received through SIP info messages, and finally, in-band mode detects DTMF tones within the audio stream itself. This is useful when handling audio tones from analog or PSTN sources. Many times, to use, let's say, lines from banks where you have to press 1, 2, you need to have this set correctly. On 10 SIP, we used to set the RFC 2833. RFC 4733, it's a newer version, but it's compatible with the old one. So you can use them interchangeably, but set on the PJ-SIP 4733. Info is SIP, and in-band is audio tones. You actually hear the tone. It's important to understand that in the RFC 4733, you are actually sending the DTMF as named events on the RTP packets. So they are not part of the audio. They go on a separate channel digitally. You can, if you use a Wireshark, you're going to see there 1, 2, 3. You can actually see what people were typing on the DTMF. So these are the methods to set for DTMF. You can set this DTMF mode on any endpoint. We have now the lab 3.2, creating a SIP trunk.